For one half of Phoenix Suns opening night, it felt a whole lot like Game 7, the last time Dallas came into Footprint Center. But for the second half, it was oh so sweet. And on today's episode of Locked On Suns, we will break it all down. The comeback, the game winner, the adjustments, all of it. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member, covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you all for making Locked On Suns your first listen. Happy Wednesday. I don't think this episode will be out in time for it to be Wednesday, so I guess I should say Thursday. It's midnight. I'm thrilled. That was a fun game. Welcome to the show. Hit subscribe or follow to make sure you do not miss a show. We're here every single weekday for you, getting you everything you need when it comes to Suns basketball. News, analysis, post-game shows like this one, all of it. So again, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on or watching on, and you will get all of these shows right to your feeds. You can also follow along at Locked On PHX Suns, where after every game this season, I'm going to be ripping off your 7 words or less game review. Okay, so obviously playing on the 7 seconds or less, go over to Twitter post-game at Locked On PHX Suns. I'll read a few of my favorites from today. We have I Turned It Off for Wrestling, Regretful, Never a Doubt But Stressful from All Gas No Breaks. We have Emotional Roller Coaster from Natasha, so thank you all for giving those over as well. That'll be every single game day all year long, folks, so that is what you can do over on Twitter. But let's get to this game. The Suns came back from 21 points down and a double-digit deficit in the fourth quarter. But in spite of all of that, that was a roller coaster in and of itself. But to me, it was less about the numbers, less about, okay, it was 21 points, or they, eventually come back to win by the score of 107-105. They led it by 4 at one point. It's more about how they came back. And I think the biggest thing to say, and as we get back into the swing of this, you guys know, big story is what I start with every single post-game show. We'll get into some more of the positives, more of the good stuff that happened in the second segment, and then we'll close out with some fun segments, some fun little check-ins. But the big story is the how. The Suns finally played. They were able to play Dallas on their terms. And yes, they won Game 5 of the second round series last year in pretty convincing fashion. But I would say they haven't played a game against Dallas really fully on their terms where you felt confident in it since Game 2 of that second round series. And this game, the second half of this game, was the first time that it came back. It was across a bunch of different categories. I mean, rebounding, it was 41 for Dallas, 41 for the Suns. That is really, really big. I think a big kudos especially goes to Bridges, Johnson, and Ayton. Maxi Kleber's a good rebounder, even though he's technically an undersized center. They have JaVale McGee now. Luka is a great rebounder. These guys have the ability to get on the glass. They have size at every position. They're a physical team, and the Suns evening that out was big. Low turnovers. We know that was a huge problem as the playoff series slipped away from the Suns in the spring. Bridges, Payne, guys like that were able to have the ball in their hands a little bit and avoid mistakes. Obviously, Booker and Paul took care of it too. The Suns pushed the pace, which was really, really big. They made quick decisions to get good shots in the paint. They had 56 points in the paint total. They were able to punish the Mavs for playing small. One of the things about this year's Mavs team is no Boban, no Dwight Powell, He's not playing anymore. So it's JaVale, and then it's Christian Wood, who I didn't mention with the rebounding, and then it's Maxi Kleber. And, so basically in every scenario, there's a punishable type of matchup, whether it's Kleber and Wood being a little bit undersized, or if it's McGee, being a little bit more exploitable on the perimeter. And the Suns were able to take advantage of that mostly in the paint this game. I think the best moment, though, that summed all of this sort of fight up is the Suns cut it to 1 after a big third quarter comeback. At the end of the third quarter, they cut it to 77-76. And then at that point, from that point on into the beginning of the fourth quarter, Christian Wood scored 11 straight points. He had a personal 11-0 run to put the Mavs up 12. So the Suns fight and fight. It's 19 at halftime. It gets to 20 plus in the third quarter, and then they cut it to 1 point. And then it's deflating, right? Christian Wood puts on a show, and it's feeling out of reach again, early to mid fourth quarter. But the Suns follow that up and close out the game with a 31-17 run, basically almost doubling up the Dallas Mavericks from that point on. And to me, that just exemplifies and embodies what was so awesome about their performance. I think you also have to admit, though, they made Luka uncomfortable. I wouldn't say they took him out of the game. My mouth was my words were about to slip there. That's not what happened. I mean, look, 35, 9, and 6 for Luka. You're not gonna quiet him down. They've put even more responsibility in his lap this season with Jalen Brunson gone. But you look at some of the numbers: 4 turnovers and just 6 assists. So that's pretty good. Minus 25 in the second half. When he was on the floor, the Mavs got outscored by 25. And those two things are pretty good indicators because the Suns have their own problems winning the minutes. This has been a pet peeve dating back to the playoffs last year. The Mavs have been able to win the non-Luka minutes for whatever reason. Getting lucky, I think, is a big part of it. Hitting miracle shots, whether it's Christian Wood or it's Spencer Dinwiddie. Those guys are not superstars. Somehow they're able to keep things afloat. But for the most part, if you were able to be pretty competitive, if not win the minutes when Luka is in the game, that's going to go pretty darn well for you. And then last year, if you remember in the playoffs, the games that the Suns won, 1, 2, and 5, Luka had a pretty bad assist to turnover margin. He had high turnovers, low assists, and that's a recipe to win because if you're making him force bad passes or you're making it so that he's forcing his shot and not passing much at all, those are going to be the ways to beat him. The Suns were able to do a lot of that tonight by mixing up coverages more than they did in the playoffs. They fought a little bit harder, I think, in general. Early in the game, they were fighting through screens a little bit more. There was obviously some switching. There was a ton of switching. Plenty of times they got into bad mismatches with Luka, whether it was Chris Paul having to defend him or other guys. But they also mixed in some other stuff. Monty said post-game that they weren't trying to sort of blitz Luka, but maybe it wasn't the game plan. I kind of find it hard to believe watching it happen so many times that they weren't embracing it a little bit. I mean, Monty sort of talked about it as a negative where Luka was manipulating them into that a little bit, but I think it works. I think as a look to go to every so often to make him uncomfortable, I actually don't hate it, and I think it worked, even if it was an accident or a mistake in this game. And I just think, again, the fighting. Everyone from Cam Payne to Damion Lee, who we'll talk about, to Cam Johnson, they all made him work. And the Suns weren't necessarily afraid to have those guys match up on him because they knew most likely there's going to be a switch happening anyway. So they were content to have Cam Johnson start possessions on him, have Chris Paul start possessions guarding Luka, and just live with it. And most of the time, in the second half at least, he made mistakes. They fought a little bit harder. They mixed things up a little bit better, and that's all you really need to do. And he can have 35, 9, and 6, and you can still win the game. I just think in the playoffs last year, the Mavs dictated everything. The Suns helped them out, of course, by getting frustrated, making mental mistakes, going off script, as a result of the Mavs playing so confidently and so well, and the Suns couldn't handle that. But tonight it flipped. I really think it did, and it looked a lot more like the Suns had control. They weren't fazed by Dallas, and in moments like that Christian Wood run, you saw they weren't fazed even when the Mavs were playing well, right? It's one thing to say, okay, we had a dominant second half, of course we're going to be confident, but even when even when the runs came back against them, the Suns were able to keep pushing and obviously come out with a victory. That's just, it's impossible to understate that. That was a very big statement considering the opponent, the history, the doubt going in about this Suns team overall. You cannot ignore what this win was able to publicly state. This team made a statement. They announced that this isn't going to be a broken season, no matter what people might think. I want to talk about the offense because that was a lot about, tactics, adjustments, toughness, physicality, defense. But the offense really, really came alive, especially in that fourth quarter, led by Devin Booker at point guard. So we'll get into all of that coming up. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by BetOnline.net, your number one source for all things sports betting. That's right. College basketball is starting soon. The NBA just started. Of course, football is every single weekend, so you can find the latest player developments, team matchups, news podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every game. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for sports betting news, analysis, and info, as well as live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. I'm already seeing odds for game night on Friday. Phoenix Suns are... Oh, no, this is not Friday. The Friday lines that are up are Lakers-Clippers. The Clippers are technically on the road in that game, but we know that's not real. And they are 5.5-point favorites. I happen to like that matchup quite a bit. Thursday odds, Bucks 76ers. The Sixers are 4-point favorites at home. I kind of like the Bucks there, +4. You can get +100 odds. So basketball is back. Everything is coming rapid fire every single night. BetOnline has you covered for all of it. So head to their website today or use their mobile app to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. So, Point Booker. I don't want to say that I thought the chapter was done when it comes to playing that role in his career, but I definitely do. I will admit I'm surprised. Booker was running the second unit offense even when Campaign was out there. He had 9 assists tonight, just 2 turnovers, beating blitzes better. That was a big thing against Dallas specifically last season. As that series came to a close in games 6 and 7, they were just blitzing and trapping Booker. Nobody else was able to make a play. Chris Paul was clearly hampered. None of the younger role players really stepped up. And the rubric became pretty easy for Dallas's defense. Get the ball out of Booker's hands and live with the results after that. And tonight, I think he kind of took it upon himself when the ball was in his hands. He either was just getting around the defense, getting through the defense with his dribble, or he was making the right pass and these other guys were stepping up. And that brings us to Deandre Ayton. So, step one was putting the ball in Booker's hands, even when Campaign was out there. Obviously, no Landry Shamet tonight. We've seen Booker have the ball in his hands with Paul out there in the past. It's a little different looking because it'll usually be initiated by CP, and then Booker will, a second side pick and roll after the ball's been reversed, or he's, coming off of a screen and just sort of finishing the play, but maybe he'll pass out of it on occasion. This was more of a concerted effort to have Booker just initiating, running the offense. Part 2 was Ayton in particular being the one to step up, and with those blitzes, rather than just tossing it around the arc to another perimeter player, how many times were we talking about, can somebody just flare up to the top of the 3-point arc, Johnson or Crowder or Bridges, and just get the ball and keep it moving? Or we even saw, as the Suns got desperate, especially in that Game 7 against Dallas last year, They were using Mikal Bridges as a screener, hoping that getting him downhill and getting him the ball was going to be a better option than somebody like, McGee or Biyombo or Ayton. In this case, Ayton did a fantastic job. The Suns were setting up screens by Ayton to give Booker an outlet when that pressure came from the Mavs, and I think his improvement as a scorer and as a passer was able to punish the defense. I think he's harder to predict. Yes, he has gotten better at navigating those spots, not fouling when he catches the ball, catching the ball, itself, just actually having the glue hands to get it, not turning it over. But I think there's also something to be said for rounding it out, being balanced and not being predictable, right? So when he catches it now, teams know he can put the ball on the ground and get a shot off. He can get the hook shot over either shoulder, right? He can put the ball on the ground and get to a dunk. He's more comfortable drawing fouls, even if the free throws aren't coming the way we might want them to still. And he can pass, right? And he's not going to foul, and he's going to be deft about it. And so to me, that does a ton of, that makes a big difference when it comes to how he's guarded, because teams can't play him for anything when he catches the ball. That's the level of, Blake Griffin, Draymond Green, these guys who have become really, really good in those short roll situations, catching the ball on the move when the ball handler gets doubled. I guess even Yusuf Nurkic, right, with Damian Lillard. Draymond with Curry. Blake with Chris Paul. These are all times when those guys get doubled and the big man has been able to make a big difference. I've talked a lot this summer, heading into this season, about the Book and DA connection as one of the most easy ways to involve Ayton more in the offense. It's just pretty simple to me. Those are two of your best offensive players. They're two of your best players overall. They have positionally and schematically, they fit together. You could just run a quick pick and roll. And tonight was a great example of what that can look like, making life easier for one another. And those two have barely run pick and roll the past 2 years. It's not even just that they're not, assisting one another, which I've talked about. Booker doesn't assist Ayton very much, which is a weird little statistical nugget there. But it's not even just that. It's just they don't even run pick and roll very much. And so tonight was just a template. Tonight was, here's how it can work. They can make life easier for one another. Ayton can be part of the solution to get past the double teams and the blitzing and everything else that Booker has had to face. And likewise, Booker is an amazing passer and a guy who has a lot of gravity and who's going to get those that amount of attention. And so Ayton's going to get more space to operate if he's engaging with those types of sets, those actions, right? It's going to be mutually beneficial. We saw it tonight. I don't know why we haven't seen it sooner, but I hope it continues. Let's talk about the bench. Damion Lee, Cameron Payne, two of the heroes of this game. Heroes, that makes it sound a lot bigger than it is, but in Lee's case, I do not think that's an exaggeration. Game-winning shot, closing this game because of injuries and lineup decisions that we'll talk about. And of course, one of those lineup decisions, Chris Paul sitting on the bench to close out the game. So I want to get into all of the rotation stuff, how these bench guys ended up impacting the game. But first, today's show, guys, brought to you by MySolarNerd.com. Folks, if you've lived in a sunny state like ours, you've had people stop by your house offering you what they call, quote, free solar. But the truth is, many of these companies aren't local. They're not based in Arizona, so they don't know what they're doing in Arizona, and they're just trying to nickel and dime you. If you've considered solar, of course, we all know the benefits it has, but something just felt off the way that it's been put to you. My Solar Nerd is here to help. The guys at MySolarNerd.com are local. They understand the nuances of going solar here in Arizona, and they've been doing this a while. They know that an educated customer is a happy customer, and their no-pressure approach will make sure all your questions get answered. And once you're ready, they'll put their industry knowledge to work for you by choosing the best equipment, warranties, and Better Business Bureau accredited installers in their network. They'll make sure the transition to solar is as smooth as possible by managing that entire project for you. And on the back end, they'll help you figure out, apply for, and receive all the credits and incentives you may qualify for so that transition goes smoothly. Our Locked On listeners can get a $50 Amazon gift card when they book a no-commitment evaluation. This promotion, again, only for our listeners and only for homeowners. You can't put a solar panel on your apartment no matter how much you might want to. And trust me, I'm in that boat too. Visit mysolarnerd.com and select Locked On in the How'd You Hear About Us section to get a $50 Amazon gift card when you book. Make the switch to solar on your terms. Start your research process today by visiting mysolarnerd.com and show Locked On some love by letting them know we sent you. Folks, going solar doesn't need to be complicated, and My Solar Nerd makes it easy. Bench Mob Vibe Check is one of these silly segments we like to do at the end of these shows on game nights. I hope you guys are ready for, what is this, round 3 of season number 3, season 3, what are we going to call it, of these post-game shows where I go solo, and every single season we've done the Bench Mob Vibe Check. It's going to look a little different this year. Just like the bench does for the Phoenix Suns. I think this year's Bench Mob Vibe Check is going to be sort of a taking the pulse, and I don't mean that in like the lingo way that you'll hear it used on content. I literally mean taking the pulse, like, is there a pulse? Is there a heartbeat? Are we still alive here? And maybe tonight is an indication that I'm exaggerating on that. But we all watched the preseason. We all know what this roster looks like. And I think the bench is a big question mark. So to have them stand out tonight, game 1, after all of that doubt, with Landry Shamet out with a hip strain, with Cam Johnson having to go to the bench at the end of the game, with cramps in his legs, all of that, if you had told me before the game, not only is the bench already a question mark, but there's going to be even more absences tonight. What do you think, Brendon? How's it going to go? I would say you're absolutely crazy if you think it's going to be a plus, but it was. So let's start with Damion Lee, again, the hero of the game. I think the confidence stands out right away. Like, we can talk about the game winner, fall away shot over Dinwiddie, if I'm remembering correctly. Confident there too. But aside from the the prominent the display of it with that one shot, he plays like he's been in this system with these guys for years. Like, sometimes you say you don't notice somebody and that's a pejorative, that's a bad thing. You're criticizing them. Like, people used to say that about Andrew Wiggins. There's lots of guys you could say that about who have a lot of talent. You just forget about them because they don't impact the game. I don't think it's a bad thing in this case with Lee. I think you don't notice him because he just clicks into place. Monty usually uses the word connector, right, for big men. He's talked about it with Frank Kaminsky, Dario Saric, even Aaron Baines. But I think the connector on this second unit, I mean, maybe you say Jack Landale, I think it's Damion Lee. You know, he probably won't have many fall-away game winners this year after this one, but his comfort taking and making the big threes that he took from all the places around the arc, that's an underrated thing, you know. A, again, that confidence. B, the versatility of his shot. A lot of players, even ones we think of as great shooters, might only be comfortable from the corner, especially in big moments. He took threes from the top of the key, from the wing, everywhere. And that's what Jay Crowder was doing. You know, that's what Cam Johnson does. But Damion Lee filled right into that same role and executed that. Took those shots, made a lot of them. He finished 3 of 5 from deep. He admitted early in the game he was passing shots up, which all of us saw. You saw it, I saw it. And he admitted it, but he really picked it up in that second half like the rest of the team did. And we will never forget this. Maybe it's the best moment Damion Lee ever has as a Sun in terms of the spotlight and the game-winning nature of it. But I think he will be a part of this rotation even if Shamet and Cam Johnson come back soon. Maybe it's in place of Torrey Craig. Maybe it's sometimes in place of Cam Payne a little bit. I don't know, but Monty loves him. He just played a hell of a game tonight. He'll be back. Cam Payne. I have Lee as the hero. I have Cam Payne as the guy who just held up. And again, I don't even mean that as a negative necessarily. I mean, if you've listened to this show before, you know I have my doubts about Cam Payne. I do think the scouting reports have started to figure him out. But at the end of the day, to stay afloat, last year his numbers were bad. He wasn't efficient as a shooter. He was a negative most of the time when he was on the court in terms of the stats. But they won 64 games, right? He was part of lots of successful moments. All it takes for him is effort and a few big shots. Even though Cam Payne can be frustrating, he doesn't make a ton of big mistakes. That's why Monty still trusts him, even though the shooting percentage isn't where you might want it to be, even when, like I said, the stats show that when he's out there, it doesn't always go super well for the Suns in terms of outscoring the opponent consistently. But he makes the right rotations on defense. He doesn't turn the ball over a ton. He takes some bad shots, but not an overwhelming amount of bad shots. And so he's not killing you in terms of negative plays. So all it takes is a few positive plays. That can be fighting on defense and on a switch a few times. And maybe you're contributing to a stop. Maybe you're making a big three in a big moment the way that he did. He had a layup that was big. He had a mid-range shot that was big. And those all add up. He just needs a few of those high-effort defensive plays and big shooting moments to be valuable. And that's what he did tonight. So he closed the game over Paul in theory. I actually see it potentially more as the way that I was watching it in real time is that Payne actually closed the game for Johnson, and Lee was the guy who really had the hot hand that Monty wanted to stick with in terms of playing really well, impacting the game at a high level. I almost feel like Payne is the guy who got shooed into the lineup because Johnson had the cramps. I wonder what happens if Johnson is healthy and Paul still sits. I feel like we actually might have seen Booker, Lee, Bridges, Johnson, Ayton as the closing lineup. Instead, we had a little bit more of a traditional lineup with Lee as the small forward and Bridges at the four. It's all semantics in terms of the position, but in terms of the people, I do think Lee played better than Payne and probably in terms of that trust factor is a little bit higher up on the pecking order right now. It's just the fact that Payne plays a position, point guard, that you need two of on every team. So he's going to keep getting minutes. Let's get to the Chris Paul part of this. I don't want to overreact too much right now. There will be more to come on tomorrow's show for sure. I'm sure this will be something we revisit throughout the season as well. But Chris Paul came out in the fourth quarter at the 6-minute and 41-second mark. That's normal. As Monty said post-game, that's always been Chris Paul's rotation for the whole time he's been a Sun. That was Ricky Rubio's rotation pattern. When he was a Sun, he would leave midway through the fourth quarter and then come back with about 3 or 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter just to get one final rest before clutch time. But what wasn't normal is that Chris Paul never returned. Cam Payne, Damion Lee, they helped lead the comeback. They stayed on the floor, and Chris Paul sat out. So, again, Monty sort of downplayed it post-game. He said it was pretty much normal. I just didn't bring him back at that last little bit because things were flowing so well. But the reality is, things were flowing well, sure, but the game was very much in the balance. It was effectively tied at that point, right? When Chris Paul would have come back in around 3 minutes. So I get what Monty's saying, but that's still very noteworthy. I mean, we might have to go all the way back to Chris Paul's rookie season to see the last time he would have sat out of clutch time of a close game when health was not the problem. So it might be nothing in terms of how Monty's thinking about it, but it is something, whether he's thinking about it that way or not. It's noteworthy that the second best player on the team just rested during a huge comeback because other guys had it going, you know? It matters. I don't know what it means. I'm definitely not saying it's like Chris Paul is going to be benched or anything. What I more think it's just a sign of flexibility and almost like humility by Monty Williams that this is even an option now. How many times, I mean, you can go back to game, I believe it was 3 of the Lakers series when he had the shoulder, neck, nerve situation after his arm got, pulled out in game 1 of that series. And everybody has corroborated this at this point. Monty came to Chris and said, "You're not playing. You're hurting the team." Chris said, "Yes, I am. I won't hurt the team. You can take my word for it." And Chris played, right? There have been very, very prominent moments in both playoff runs where Chris Paul was a minus. Very clearly a negative player, especially in that Dallas series. And he stayed on the floor. So, again, the fact that this isn't even an option is pretty monumental. I really think it's a big deal. Again, I'll break it down more. I'll talk about it more as we get more from Monty on this and everything else, but there's no way to ignore it. It's going to matter to keep Paul fresh, which is big. It's also going to be better for finding the right options, just period. Like, this team wants to get creative. It wants to experiment. The roster might change post-Jay Crowder trade, post-trade deadline. And the more ability that Monty has to mix and match and find the right lineups and not be beholden to anything is just going to be better. So I hope it continues. I'm interested to see how Chris Paul reacts to it. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. Keep it right here. One more show this week. We'll have 2 games to talk about Monday. So hit follow, hit subscribe. Do not go anywhere. Do not miss a show. It'll be in your feed as long as you hit that button. And it'll be every day. Sound good? All right. In the meantime, go make Locked On NBA your second listen to catch up on everything else going on around the league.